He was ordered to deport the alien mother, but then her daughter whispered, "Please don't take my mommy." Location: Varela Station 6, Enforcement Wing, Central Command. The room was cold, lit only by flickering panels recessed into the steel ceiling. Fluorescent glare reflected off glass screens, casting long, angular shadows across the desks. Inside, the command center smelled of old coffee, ozone, and dry plastic, like the air had been recycled one too many times. Mark Rowland stood with his arms crossed, eyes fixed on the holographic profile spinning slowly before him. The violet-skinned alien woman on screen didn't move. Static image. Eyes lowered. Shoulders slumped. No aggression. Just stillness. Her name, Celira. Her status, undocumented entry. Refugee. No planetary sponsor. No translator assigned. One dependent minor. Charges. Forged identification. Trespassing in restricted quarters. And she wasn't even resisting. Behind Mark, a younger officer tapped the screen. She's flagged. Priority 6. Last sweep before we hand over to station administration. Mark didn't answer. His jaw tightened. It was supposed to be his last week. 20 years in enforcement. Enough time to see people lie, beg, fight, break. But never this quiet. Never this empty-looking. "You're the last field hand with clearance in that sector," the officer added. "Deportation scheduled in 6 hours. Get her tagged and staged." That was the order. Tag. Move. Finish the file. He nodded, took the data pad from a table. Didn't speak. Just walked out fast, controlled. Past the checkpoints, through gray corridors humming with low energy. Past people who didn't meet his eyes. He didn't blame them. Varela Station was winding down. Oxygen restrictions in 6 sectors. Half the residential rings already evacuated. Food lines under ration authority. Every sweep brought in more displaced families. Some are armed, some sick, some just tired. Refugees like Celira had nowhere to go, no one to argue for them. Mark's boots echoed through the passage leading to holding cell 17B. He paused outside the door, exhaled. His hand hovered over the pad to unlock the cell. He told himself he'd seen worse. Then the door slid open with a hollow hiss. Inside, the holding cell was barely lit. One wall panel flickered, casting a pulsing light across the stained floor. No bedding, no furniture, just concrete, metal silence. In the corner, curled tightly around a small figure, was Celira. Her skin was unmistakable. That soft violet tone unique to the Varellan cast that had once been considered beautiful and rare. Not anymore. Not after the colony collapse. Not after they'd been labeled unfit for human integration. She was barefoot, knees drawn up. A shift hung off her frame, ripped at one side, exposing most of her thigh. It looked like it was meant for someone smaller, someone younger. Her hair, long, white, tangled, hung over her face as she turned away, clutching her child tighter. Mark took one step forward. The floor creaked. The woman didn't move. But the child did. A girl, no older than 5. She had her mother's skin, her mother's hair, but bigger eyes, rounder, wide with fear and curiosity. Her tunic was oversized, cinched at the waist with a frayed cloth tied in a knot. Her legs were scraped. One foot was wrapped in what looked like a torn blanket strip. Mark stared at them in silence. He felt a pressure in his chest. Not pity, but discomfort. A creeping sense of wrongness. Like he didn't belong in that room. Like none of them did. He cleared his throat. "Say, Lyra." The woman didn't reply. Didn't lift her head. He moved closer, slowly, keeping his hands visible. "You and the girl need to stand. I have orders to move you to processing." Still no answer. He crouched low, not close enough to touch, but close enough to see the tremble in her arms. "You'll be transferred to a transport cell. After that, off-station clearance." No anger. No raised voice. He kept it even. Her breathing quickened. She still didn't look at him. Mark pulled out the cuff reader. It blinked red. One click. One tag. He'd done this hundreds of times. He leaned forward. And then, a small hand grabbed his sleeve. He stopped. He looked down. The child stood between him and her mother. Her voice barely a whisper. Please don't take my mommy. Mark froze. He stared at the girl. Her eyes locked with his, steady, unblinking. He didn't know what to say. He wasn't trained for that sentence. She wasn't supposed to speak. She wasn't supposed to look at him like that, with more understanding than a child should ever carry. He stood slowly, the cuff reader still in his hand. Its red light blinked in the silence, steady and loud in his mind. He looked back down at Celira. She had lifted her head slightly. Her face was blank. No defiance. No hope. Just exhaustion. The kind that didn't sleep. The kind that had lived in hiding too long. He stepped back. The reader went back into his jacket. She blinked. Her arms tightened around her daughter. Mark spoke low. Quiet. There's an emergency tunnel in vent shaft 4B, east of the water reclamation line. Use it. Now. She stared at him. Didn't move. He unzipped his jacket, shrugged it off, and held it out. For the girl, he said. She didn't take it, but the girl did, clutching it to her chest like treasure. He tapped his datapad, wiped the log entry. He would take the risk. He keyed in a manual override on the lock. It beeped green. You have 10 minutes before the next patrol sweep, he said. If you're not gone by then, I won't be able to help. He turned, left the cell, walked 10 steps down the hall, then stopped. Silence behind him. Then, footsteps. Light. Bare. He glanced back. Celira was walking behind him. Slow. Careful. Holding her daughter's hand. The child was wearing his jacket, dragging along the floor. They didn't speak. Neither did he. When they reached the elevator, he punched in a service-level override. The door slid open. A dim metal shaft. Destination. Storage tunnels beneath the power grid. Not listed on the main manifest. They stepped inside. Mark stood just outside. You stay here until lights dim twice. That's the signal for backup grid transfer. After that, move fast. Keep low. He turned to leave. Then, why? It was Celira. Her voice was dry. Rough. But it was a voice. He didn't answer. He just looked at the child, still gripping his jacket, still watching him like he was something other than what his badge said he was. Mark stepped back into the hallway. The elevator closed, and for the first time in years, his hands trembled. He walked away fast, but not toward the command center. He had to clear their tracks, scrub every trace, alter surveillance. The file would be incomplete. Someone would notice. But he couldn't stop seeing the girl's face. Couldn't unhear that one quiet sentence. Please don't take my mommy. And in that moment, Mark Rowland knew. He wasn't enforcement anymore. He was something else. And whatever that was, it had just begun. The tunnels beneath the agricultural ring were colder than expected. Not freezing, just enough to sting bare feet and numb fingers. The walls were narrow, ribbed with old pipework and damp insulation. No lights. Only the occasional flicker from corroded motion strips, most long dead. It was a place designed to be forgotten. Mark led them without speaking. His boots made solid contact with the grated floor. Behind him, Celira's footsteps were softer, almost hesitant, but never far. She kept close. One hand held tightly to her daughter's. The other gripped the edge of the oversized jacket still wrapped around Lenny's small frame. The child clung to it like it was the only thing tethering her to safety. Mark paused at a junction and keyed open a rusted hatch. It screeched open reluctantly. Behind it, a decommissioned access chamber lined with storage crates and broken supply carts. No cameras, no heat scans, just dust and shadow. Here, he said. Celira stepped inside without asking questions. She didn't thank him. She didn't plead. She just looked around the space, scanned it with tired, quiet precision, then led Lenny to the far corner where the walls dipped into a dry utility recess. She sat first. Lenny climbed into her lap. Mark didn't follow. He stayed by the door, arms crossed, watching them, listening. He couldn't stop hearing the child's voice from earlier. Not the words, just the tone. That tiny whisper full of certainty. Not desperation, not panic, just truth. It wasn't how a child should speak. He opened the nearest crate. Inside, sealed emergency blankets, old ration bars, 2 half-drained thermal packs. He tossed one toward her. She caught it on instinct. Her arms had muscle, hidden under the bruises and dirt, but her grip faltered. She rubbed the thermal pack, warming it up, then pressed it gently to her daughter's chest. Lenny exhaled in a sharp breath. Then her head dropped to her mother's shoulder. Salira's hand didn't stop moving. She never looked away from the child. Mark leaned against the wall. He was tired. More than that, he was tense. His neck ached. His back was soaked with sweat beneath his armor vest. The weight of what he'd just done was settling into his bones. He'd broken protocol, tampered with station systems, a traceable override. Eventually, someone would realize the deportation log was incomplete. Questions would be asked. He wasn't sure how long he had before his name got flagged. He checked the datapad again. Disable tracking. Wiped the interaction history. Reassigned his security ID to a patrol route across the station's outer shell. With luck, it'd buy them half a day, maybe more. He looked back up. Salira was watching him now. Not speaking, just watching. Her posture had changed. Less guarded, less curled in, but still alert, still wary. Her eyes were hard to read, silver-flecked irises wide from the low light. She didn't speak until Lenny had completely fallen asleep. You should have tagged us. Her voice was quiet but firm. No accusation, just fact. Mark didn't move. I know. Why didn't you? He considered lying, but didn't. I didn't plan it, he said. She spoke, and it stopped feeling like a job. Salira's lips pressed into a thin line. Not angry, not grateful. She looked down at her daughter and adjusted the jacket so it covered more of her bare legs. You'll lose everything, she said. They'll track the breach. I know. You don't even know who we are. He shook his head. Doesn't matter. Silence stretched. Then, unexpectedly, she nodded, like she accepted that answer, even if it didn't make sense. Mark looked at her again, more carefully this time. She didn't carry herself like the others he'd processed. There was no panic, no bargaining, just exhaustion and awareness. Like she'd been hunted for years, and this was just one more stop. Who was helping you before you were caught? He asked. No one. You forged an entry chip. I stole it. From who? She hesitated. Then, a Varellan woman, dying in a waste tunnel. She'd held on to it for days, hoping someone would take her kid. I found her too late. Mark took that in. His chest felt heavier. I used it for Lenny, she added. Got us through the first scan layer. The rest we hid. How long were you squatting in the residential quadrant? 3 weeks. That didn't add up. Surveillance should have picked them up within days. You avoided sensors? Moved at night. Only used abandoned shafts. We didn't take food. Just scraps. Mark ran a hand over his face. She was smart. Too smart to have been caught by accident. You were betrayed, he said. A slow nod. Someone reported us. I think they saw her, Lenny, stealing from a hydrant tap. He stared at her in silence. Then he stepped away from the wall, walked toward the far side of the chamber, and sat on an overturned crate. His knees popped. He rested his arms on them and lowered his head. You said nothing when I entered the cell, he murmured. I thought it was time, she replied. I didn't want her to watch me scream. Mark felt something twist in his stomach. He couldn't look at her. Instead, he turned his gaze toward Lenny, sleeping now, tucked in her mother's side, one small hand wrapped in the oversized jacket sleeve. What does she know about this? He asked. Enough. He nodded slowly. She understands whispers. She watches expressions. She doesn't talk unless she has to. Why? She used to talk too much. She stopped when it got dangerous. Mark leaned back against the cold metal behind him. Let the silence wrap around them. The vent above hummed with weak airflow. Somewhere far off, a bulkhead creaked, but the room was still. He didn't realize how much his shoulders ached until he stopped bracing them. Salira shifted again. He noticed her legs were bruised at the knees, like she'd been crawling often. One of her collar straps had torn during transport, hanging loose. She didn't adjust it. Mark stood and grabbed a ration bar from the crate. He tossed it over. This time she caught it clean. Eat, he said. We'll figure out the rest after the light cycle. She watched him again, more intently this time. Then she nodded, broke off a small piece, and gave it to her daughter first. Then she ate the rest. Mark didn't move. He stayed by the door for another hour, just watching them breathe quietly and planning, because he knew this wasn't just hiding anymore. This was escape. And if he didn't make the next move fast enough, they'd all be dead before Chapter 3 ever started. The emergency lights above the power grid flickered twice, once dim, once sharp, before fading into their regular pulsing rhythm. That was the signal. Mark stood first. His back ached from leaning against the crate, but the stiffness kept him alert. He glanced toward the corner. Celira was already awake, her arm wrapped around Lenny, who stirred slowly under the oversized jacket. "Time to move," Mark said quietly. Celira nodded once, already adjusting the cloth around her daughter's shoulders. Lenny blinked up at him with that same quiet expression she always wore, wary but calm, as if she'd lived through enough to know panic was wasted energy. Mark checked the tunnel schematic on his wrist pad. Most outer sensors were still in standby due to grid cycling, but that would change in 12 minutes. He had one route mapped: a crawl space through the water reclamation ring, then down a maintenance shaft that hadn't been logged in years. If they hit it right, they'd avoid the bulk of the patrols. He handed Celira a small breather mask. It was old but functional. Air's thinner past the utility duct. "This'll get you both through." She took it without a word, then crouched to fit it over her daughter's face. Lenny didn't flinch. She just gripped her mother's hand and kept walking. They moved single file. Mark first, Celira in the middle, Lenny at the rear, linked by fingers. The air grew damper the deeper they went. Piping hissed quietly overhead. Occasionally, water dripped from corroded joints, trailing down the walls like condensation from something long forgotten. "Stay low," Mark muttered as he pried open the panel into the access shaft. It opened with a creak. He winced at the sound. He climbed in first, motioned for them to follow. The shaft was barely wide enough for his shoulders. Celira moved slower but deliberately, pulling Lenny in behind her. The space forced them to crawl, their knees scraping against metal slats and dust-coated tubing. After several meters, the air thinned again. Lenny coughed once, muffled by the mask. Celira paused, her hand tightening on her daughter's back. Mark turned. Another 5 meters. Then we drop. At the end of the tunnel was a vertical shaft with an old, rusted ladder welded into the side. Below, darkness. No data signature. No heat sensors. It led to a storage bunker used decades ago by hydro crews. Long since decommissioned. Perfect. Mark climbed down first. When he reached the bottom, he looked up, arms out. "Send her." Celira lowered Lenny slowly. The girl didn't make a sound. She wrapped her arms around Mark's neck as he caught her and held on, not from fear, but with trust. That trust unsettled him more than he expected. Celira followed, climbing slowly. Her knees bled against the rusted ladder rungs. She didn't flinch, didn't ask for help. She reached the bottom, landing with a soft grunt. Her shift dress had torn again, this time high along her thigh, but she ignored it. She pulled Lenny close and turned toward the dark room. Mark scanned the space. The lights here were motion-triggered, old halogens that buzzed to life when he stepped forward. Rows of ancient crates lined the walls. Most were sealed. Some had emergency supply markings. He pried one open: blankets, bandages, flare sticks. It would do. He turned to Celira. "We stay here for 6 hours. Then I'll check for evac routes." She nodded, lips tight. "What about the patrols?" "They're still checking Sector 12. Your arrest file shows no movement past holding. They think you're tagged and waiting in transfer." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "You erased the entire chain?" "Scrambled it. It'll hold, unless someone flags it for audit." Celira lowered herself onto a crate and pulled Lenny into her lap again. The girl curled close, resting her head under her mother's chin. Then Celira looked at him and asked a question she hadn't dared before. "Why are you helping us?" Mark stared at the wall, jaw tight. "I don't know. Not pity. No. Guilt." He hesitated. "Maybe. I've deported families before. Never stopped. Never looked. And this time, your daughter touched my arm," he said. "Spoke to me. Not like a child. Like someone who already knew how the world works. I didn't want that to be the last thing I remembered from this job." He didn't look at her. He couldn't. There was a long silence. Then, softly, Celira spoke again. We weren't always like this. My people, I know. Before the collapse, the Varellan core colonies had standing trade rights. We worked in terraforming, hydroskin tech, medical splicing. Then the fertility caste came. Her eyes sharpened. Yes. Mark finally looked at her. That's what they marked you, right? Caste registered. That's why you're flagged as breeder class. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. The silence was answer enough. They made you property. They made us production units, she corrected. And when we stopped producing, they sold us. Or discarded us. Mark nodded once. And Lenny, I don't know who the donor was. I never saw him. She wasn't meant to live. She was in error. Mark crouched, sat on a lower crate. She doesn't look like an error. Celira's eyes softened. No, she's the only right thing I ever did. They sat there, the three of them, in a bunker that smelled of dust and old oil. Mark's wrist pad pinged, a silent vibration only he could feel. A new order had been issued, sweep units rerouted. Audit scheduled on transfer logs within 4 hours. They were running out of time. He looked at them again, Celira, bruised and exhausted, and Lenny, half asleep in her lap. He spoke without thinking. We can't stay on station. Celira looked up. Mark stood. There's an outbound tug docked at sublevel Bay 19. Privately registered. No biometric scans. It rotates supply cargo to one of the rim moons, Relin 3. Not much there. No cities. No security grid. But it's off record. She blinked, processing. And we live there. If we make it that far. What about you? Mark paused. Then, I'm not staying here. He didn't say it aloud, but the truth was pressing into him now. The moment he erased their file, his life on this station ended. He had nothing left. No family. No friends. His resignation had been due in 5 days. Retirement plan suspended due to budget cuts. Helping them hadn't ruined his future. It had just finally shown him what kind of future he didn't want anymore. Celira studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. Then we leave together. Lenny stirred in her arms. She looked up again, her voice sleepy. Are we going somewhere warm? Mark looked down at her. For once, he didn't hesitate. Yes, somewhere quiet, somewhere safe. And for the first time, Lenny smiled. Small, faint, but real. The storage bunker was behind them. They moved fast now. No more rest, no more silence. Mark led with his sidearm holstered but ready, eyes scanning every junction. He had rerouted power flow to the cargo levels an hour earlier, enough to kill 2/3 of the working cams. But the last third were mobile drones. They didn't announce themselves. They buzzed in low from corners, scanning for movement and heat. Mark didn't tell Celira how thin the margin was. They passed through an unlit corridor marked maintenance restricted, no civilian access. The lettering had peeled long ago. Pipes overhead hissed with pressure releases. The floor groaned with their steps. No one spoke. Lenny walked in the middle, one of Celira's hands always gripping hers, the other holding a ration packet she hadn't finished. Her eyes stayed low, but her pace never slowed. Mark checked his wrist pad again. Bay 19 was 3 levels down. They'd make it in time if nothing went wrong. He hated that thought. At the access ladder to sublevel D, Mark paused. I go first. If you hear anything, shouting, footfalls, comms, pull back. Celira nodded. He slid the hatch open and descended quickly, boots hitting the steel rungs with practiced efficiency. The access tunnel below was short and curved, running straight to the underside of the docking level. Light bled in from a maintenance grill. Mark knelt beside it. Beyond the grill, docking Bay 19. Just as he'd left it, dim, cold, quiet. The tug ship, Cauldron S2, was latched into its mooring with fuel cables attached and no crew visible. A perfect exit if no one had gotten there first. He tapped his comm mic once, short signal. Celira's voice came through low. Clear. Yeah, bring her. He unscrewed the grill with a multi-tool. Metal clinked softly onto the ground. Then came footsteps. Not theirs. Mark froze. Fast. Heavy. Close. Not patrol rhythm. Too fast. Not enough gear noise. Someone running. He turned to the access shaft, drew his pistol, and motioned hard. Stay up there. Don't come down. But Sailira was already halfway through the hatch with Lenny behind her. She saw his face and stopped cold. Someone's here, Mark said. Go back. Now. But it was too late. The footsteps reached the bend. A figure slid into view. Young, armored, breathing hard. Station patrol, but not full enforcement. His badge was tilted. Stained. Private security. Off duty. Drunk? No. Desperate. He raised a shock baton. You think no one noticed the file gaps? He barked. Mark stepped in front of the ladder, gun raised. Put down. You wiped the logs, the man growled. You know what that means for all of us? They're purging the grid tomorrow, reviewing every transfer. I lose my station clearance. I lose my payout. You shouldn't be here. I know what you're hiding. And I don't care about the woman. Give me the child. They'll clear me if I deliver a Varellan-born live. Mark didn't hesitate. He fired. One shot. Clean. Center mass. The body dropped hard. Armor clanged against the floor. The hallway rang out with silence. Mark turned to Sailira, her eyes wide, one arm across Lenny's head, shielding her from the sound. They didn't scream. They didn't cry. But the tension in her body was sharp locked. Lenny's little hands clutched her mother's waist so tightly her knuckles paled. Mark exhaled hard. Move. They dropped into Bane 19 together. The floor trembled slightly under the tug's gravity dampeners. The Cauldron S2 looked worse up close. Scratches, patchwork repairs, sealed override plates, but had one key advantage. No AI NAV. All manual, which meant it wouldn't log unauthorized boarders. Mark ran to the side hatch, keyed in a hard override, and jammed the latch open. Inside, he said. Sailira lifted Lenny into the doorway first, then climbed in herself. Mark followed last, sealing the door behind them. Inside, cramped quarters, smell of old lubricant and vacuum-sterilized air. One pilot seat, 2 emergency bunks, a side compartment for storage. No food, no meds, no questions. It was enough. He dropped into the pilot's seat and began override protocol. Sailira hovered near the wall, clutching Lenny to her chest. Her arms shook, finally, not from fear, from the come-down of too many hours moving, too many close calls. You okay? Mark asked without looking. I don't know, she whispered. You shot him. He was going to take her. She didn't argue, but she didn't answer either. The engines rumbled as the NAV system confirmed undocked clearance. The system was blind to human identity. Mark made sure of it. One touch of a button, and they'd be pushed out on an unmapped trajectory, masked as cargo drift. The only problem, once they left, they couldn't come back. He turned back. Sailira looked like she hadn't breathed in a full minute. Then Lenny, still quiet, reached forward and touched Mark's hand. You're shaking too, she whispered. Mark looked down. She was right. His fingers trembled faintly on the control board. Sailira met his gaze, not with fear anymore, but something more complicated. Raw. Real. You saved her, she said softly. You didn't have to. I know. She stepped forward barefoot, the jacket brushing her thighs. And for the first time, no walls between them, she reached out and touched his arm. Not out of fear. Not for safety. Just to steady him. I trust you, she said. Mark didn't speak, but his breathing slowed. Behind them, the engines rose to a dull hum. They were leaving the station, and the system had no way to stop them. He didn't know what came next, but he knew this. He wouldn't let anyone take them again. Not ever. The stars outside the viewport were motionless, cold white pinpricks against a velvet black field. But the tug ship drifted steadily forward, its engines low, quiet. It had no assigned route, no return signal, just a randomized burn pattern and a long, slow arc out of system control. Inside the ship, everything was still. Mark stood by the control console, eyes locked on the status screen. No pursuit signals, no heat trails, no intercept warnings. That meant, for now, they were clear. He allowed a long breath. His back leaned against the bulkhead, as if he'd only now allowed himself to feel how heavy his body had become. His hand was still trembling faintly. His right index finger, the one that pulled the trigger, throbbed like it carried memory in the bone. Behind him, Quiet footfalls padded across the cabin floor. Sailira moved carefully, holding a hydration pack she'd found in the ship's emergency cache. Her legs were bare from the thigh down, her shift torn at one side and still hanging low across one shoulder. There were bruises on her knees and one red scratch across her hip that looked like it had come from the ladder shaft. She said nothing. She passed Mark the water, her eyes lingering on him for a moment too long before lowering. "You haven't slept," she said quietly. "Neither have you." "I'm used to it." Mark took the water, but didn't drink. "This ship will get us to the rim in 3 days. Relin 3's outer moon is uninhabited, but I know how to patch power and seal a habitat if we find shelter." Sailira nodded, but her gaze wasn't focused on the words. Her body swayed slightly, exhaustion pulling at her posture, though she refused to let it show in her voice. Lenny sat nearby in the bunk alcove. She had curled into the corner, surrounded by a thin thermal blanket. Her eyes were open, quietly studying the seams in the metal wall. Every so often, she'd look towards Sailira or Mark, checking that neither had disappeared. Mark crouched near her. "You okay, Lenny?" The child didn't speak at first. Then she looked at him, blinked slowly, and said, "It's too quiet." Mark tilted his head. "Is that bad?" "I don't know. I don't remember quiet before." Sailira's expression broke, just slightly. She knelt beside her daughter and ran fingers gently through the white curls. "You'll get used to it," she whispered. Lenny nodded sleepily, not asking any more questions. Her hand tightened on the corner of the blanket. Eventually, she drifted off. Mark stood again, slow and stiff. His body felt like it belonged to someone else. He walked to the pilot's seat and dropped into it. The silence filled the room like pressure. There was no hum of conversation, no systems chatter, just the low, patient growl of the engines. Then he felt her. Sailira stood behind him. He didn't turn, but when her hand touched his shoulder, light, uncertain, steady, he closed his eyes. "I don't know how to rest," she said. "Me neither." She moved slowly to sit on the floor beside him. Her thigh brushed his boot, bare skin cold from the ship's air. "You've been holding it in since the cell," she said quietly. He didn't answer. She looked up at him, her expression unreadable but open. "You shot someone for us. I've shot people before, but this time it meant something." He turned toward her now. She wasn't afraid of his answer. She wasn't afraid of him. She looked tired, scraped raw, but grounded. Her fingers reached for his arm, just above the wrist, and held there. "I don't have anything to give you," she said. "I can't trade safety for my body anymore. I won't." "You don't have to," he said immediately. "I know." Her voice cracked slightly. "That's why I'm still here." She didn't kiss him. She didn't seduce him. She leaned in and rested her forehead against his arm. Her body pressed against his side. Not an invitation, but in trust. "I don't know what comes next," she said. "Neither do I. I don't want to be afraid of you. You're not. I want to feel something normal again." He swallowed. His pulse hitched. Then, slowly, he reached down. His hand found hers. He didn't squeeze. He just held it. Her fingers curled around his with a silent breath. Neither of them moved for a long time. When she finally lifted her head, she looked up at him, eyes glassy but steady. "If I ask," she whispered, "will you lie with me?" His voice came low, almost rasped. "Just lie, if that's all I can do tonight." Mark nodded. She stood first, walked toward the bunk alcove beside Lenny's. He followed without a word. The bunk was small, built for one. They fit anyway. She faced him, her body pressed to his chest. Her breath was shallow but warm. He wrapped one arm around her waist, fingertips resting against the dip in her back. Her torn shift hung loose against her spine. He felt the soft tremor in her belly as she exhaled. Her lips brushed his collarbone. Not a kiss, not seduction, just presence. A wordless promise. "I'm here." He didn't ask for more. She didn't offer it. Not yet. And as the stars turned silently outside the hull, the three of them, man, woman, child, slept in the same drifting space. For the first time in years, not hunted, not alone, just together. The tug drifted in the shadow of an ice fragment. Caught in the gravity drag of the moon, they would soon reach. Relin, Three hung dim in the forward viewport, bare, rugged, unclaimed. Inside the ship, time moved differently. Mark woke first. He didn't open his eyes right away. He was too aware of her. The weight of Celira's body curled against his chest. One leg hooked lightly over his, her breath soft against his collarbone. Her skin was warm now. Her body didn't tremble. For the first time, she was sleeping deeply. It felt like something sacred. He lay still, one hand resting over her lower back, fingers lightly spread. He could feel the small rise of her ribs with every breath. Her torn shift had ridden up during the night. Most of her thigh was bare. He didn't adjust it, didn't look longer than he should. He just held her until she stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, silver flecks catching the dim cabin light. She blinked once, then looked up at him, their faces close. No shame, no startle reflex, just recognition. They stayed like that in silence, wrapped in old thermal sheets, sharing breath. Then she spoke, voice low. "You stayed the whole night. You asked me to." She nodded. Her fingers moved, resting lightly against the curve of his ribs. "I expected to wake up alone. I didn't want to leave." She studied his face, as if searching for the hesitation. But there was none. Then she leaned in, lips brushing his neck, slight, uncertain, real. Her body shifted closer. She moved one leg over his hips, slow and steady, until she was straddling him under the blanket. Her bare thighs rested on either side of his waist. She looked down at him, hair loose, falling across her shoulders. "I want this," she said softly. Mark sat up slightly, eyes fixed on hers. "You don't have to." "I know," she said. Her voice didn't shake. "That's why I can." She leaned down, pressing her lips to his, not demanding, not desperate, just present. He kissed her back slowly, carefully. His hands moved to her hips, not to guide but to hold. Her skin was soft under his calloused palms. The blanket shifted. Her shift slid down one arm. He paused. She pressed her forehead to his. "Don't stop." Her hands pulled off his shirt, revealing the lean muscle beneath the old scars. She traced them with her fingers, over his ribs, his collar, the edge of a healed wound near his side. "You've survived too," she whispered. "I wasn't the one hunted, but you were empty." He didn't answer that, because it was true. They moved slowly. No sudden gestures, no performance, just the quiet connection of two people relearning how to be touched. Her breath hitched once as his hands found the curve of her back. His mouth met her shoulder, then her collar. Her hands threaded through his hair, pulling him closer, not for control, but closeness. They didn't rush. They didn't speak. When it finally happened, it was silent. No gasps, no words, just two people holding each other, grounding each other skin against skin in the cold shell of a drifting ship. Later, they lay together again, not tangled but aligned, her back against his chest, his arm around her waist. She spoke first. "You're not what I expected. Neither are you." Lenny stirred in the next bunk, half asleep, shifting under the blanket. Celira turned her head slightly. "Do you think she understands what we are now?" "I think she already did," Mark said. "She just waited for us to catch up." Celira let out a quiet sound, half laugh, half breath. She turned his arms and faced him fully. "I want to be more than what they made me." "You already are." She nodded once, eyes steady. "And I want to be yours." Mark kissed her forehead. "I already was," he said. Outside, Rel-Lin, 3 loomed closer. A gray, pock-marked moon full of caves, ice caverns, and silence. They had no supplies, no shelter, no guarantees. But they had a choice. And for the first time, it felt like enough. The descent was rough. The Cauldron S2 had no proper landing protocols, just thruster bursts and manual balance. Mark worked the console in silence, sweat beading at his temple as gravity pulled hard on the frame. Alarms flickered. The ship rattled like it might shake itself apart. But then, contact. A shudder. Stillness. They'd landed. He powered down the engines. Exterior temperature, sub-zero. Wind speeds high. Breathable atmosphere, barely. The moon was a wasteland of frozen plains and jagged ridges. But there were crevasses ahead. Shelter was possible. He turned in his seat. Celira stood behind him, fully dressed now. He'd given her the spare thermal coveralls from the ship's storage. They hung loose on her frame, but she had laced the belt tight. Her white hair was braided back, her violet skin flushed with determination. Lenny was beside her, bundled in both the jacket and one blanket. Her nose peeked out. She was half awake, but watching everything. They stepped out together. The wind struck them immediately, sharp and dry. Mark led them across the flat, icy terrain toward a natural ridge. He used a handheld scanner to find heat pockets. Eventually, they found it, a fissure in the cliff wall, deep and stable. Inside, the air was dry and silent. The temperature climbed fast once Mark activated the heating core he'd carried on his back. Within minutes, the space glowed a soft orange. He dropped his gear, sat down hard. Celira followed, slower. She set Lenny down on the thermal sheet and wrapped her tightly. They didn't speak right away. The quiet wasn't empty. It was earned. Mark leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. When he opened them, Lenny was crawling toward a flat stone shelf, collecting bits of frost with her fingers, lining them up like toys. It wasn't much, but it was play. Celira sat beside him and leaned in, her head against his shoulder. She said nothing. She didn't have to. This was theirs now. Not the moon. Not the future. Just this moment. He reached for her hand, wove his fingers between hers. I didn't know how much I needed this, she said quietly. Freedom? No. A place where I could choose everything. He kissed the back of her hand. You did. She nodded. Her voice dropped to a whisper. And you? Would you go back if you could? He shook his head. There's nothing left for me there. She turned toward him. Her eyes held something calmer now. Settled. I'm not broken anymore, she said. Mark looked at her, steady. You never were. Across the cave, Lenny giggled, soft and pure, as she balanced a stone on top of a pile of ice chips. Celira smiled. Mark smiled too. They didn't need a home with walls or windows. They didn't need permission to be a family. They had each other. And as the fire flickered against the cave walls and the wind howled harmlessly outside, Mark said the words that would anchor this new life forever. You're safe now. Both of you. Celira leaned into him. And for the first time since they met, she closed her eyes without fear.